Hi, y'all. Let me just pull this up in my group. I'm sorry I'm a couple of minutes late. I don't have a good reason for you. I was actually writing a piece of content. I didn't have a client call before this. I usually do, so I'm a lot more scheduled that way, and just sort of got into flow and realized, oh my goodness, we are due to be hanging out with you to have this conversation. But this is also one that I really want to have with you and dive into, talking about the grief no one talks about in business that might be keeping you from scaling. This is something I've navigated many times in my business, but also in my life. And I think it's something we just don't talk about a lot. And it is something I've supported many clients with. And I think it can be just also a sneaky thing that can keep us stuck or really kind of in the status quo and hitting those revenue ceilings if we do want to scale. So I think it's an important conversation. A very simple one, but I think there's some nuance to it. So we'll talk about what it is, how it shows up, how it can keep us stuck, why it's totally normal. Just to normalize this, I don't know that I can think of any client who's further along in business who hasn't had this come up for them. And then we'll just talk a little bit about how to move through that, and what can open up for you on the other side. Before I dive in, a couple of things. One, for my US people, I'm assuming if you're here, we are probably somewhat politically aligned. And I know many of us are quite concerned about the big, beautiful bill that was passed by the Senate. It is going to the House. There is still time to call your representative. So I know after this live stream, before my next client call, I'm going to be calling my representatives. I believe we have until the 4th. I think they're starting voting today. So just a reminder, they work for you, and you can call in and voice your complaints. And I think this is unrelated to politics, which is helpful for all of us as service providers for the investments we make. I think sometimes we forget that the people our coaches, our mentors, the programs we're in, that they work for us. I think sometimes we think we work for them. And so obviously, there are boundaries, there are expectations, there are contractual limits within that, but I think it's always helpful to remember what that dynamic is with team members, right? Similarly, and while we can't have wild expectations, we can voice our complaints, opinions, ask for those things from the people we are investing through and in, and that includes our government in the U.S. Not everybody here is in the U.S., but I think that is this is a really important one. A lot of important things are going to get taken away from a lot of people who need it if we don't take some action. So I'm going to use my space here to hopefully encourage a couple of people to do so, and then we'll pivot to the conversation at hand. The other announcement I had is we're doing a giveaway. I stopped doing these a little while ago, and I don't really know why, but if you join me live today and just leave me a comment, say hi, let me know you are here, we will pick one person to win anything from my done with you, done for you product suite. So not my one-on-one coaching, but we've got a 6-week sales course on there. I've got a training on how to host sales conversations in a way that is ick free, that also converts really well. We've got something on how to build your money blueprint. Got a couple different trainings on there. I've got a mindset, kind of the mindset blocks and training around that for entrepreneurs and creatives. So you can have your pick of that. Just let me know you're here, and we'll start doing this every week if that feels fun and good to y'all. Okay, let's dive into our conversation about the grief in business no one talks about that might be keeping you from scaling. So this actually, I think what's interesting around this topic is I think this is something that came up for me quite a bit at the beginning of business. So I think it's important to say we're talking about how this affects scaling, but I really think this affects you at every stage of business. I think this happened quite a bit for me the first, I'd say 3 years in business, but I don't think I was able to label it or realize what I was experiencing or what I was moving through. This is also something I really experienced when for those of you who don't know kind of my background, I spent 10 years, I studied psychology in college, decided was either between getting my, going to get my PhD in psychology, I was going to do more of the research side of things, or move to LA to pursue my passion of acting. I've always believed you can make money doing what lights you up and doing what you love. And so at that time, it was really acting. I moved to LA and I spent 10 years there before I moved to New York City, essentially, I say to start over, but it really was to start over, and broke into advertising, thinking I wanted to do that. And that's kind of when I found coaching, found out I was really good at marketing and sales, and started my business. The CliffsNotes version of my history. But I found this same grief coming up in that time as well, both with when I left LA, when I stopped acting, when I moved into advertising, when I left advertising to go full-time in my business, believe it or not, I had quite a bit of this grief come up. And then again, the last couple of years of my business. But this surfaced again for me last year. I'd say it was about this time last year in my business as well. And I think that's when it really landed for me in my brain as to how important this is to talk about and how important this is to process. I mean, I think we forget sometimes when we have things come up how easy when we don't process, how easy it is to hold on to certain things and how that can really keep us stagnant in business. So I know I'm teasing this out a bit here, but I want to give a little context of just all the different seasons, times, and places this has come up for me. I'll share what this is, and then we'll unpack this a little bit more. But what this really is, I mean, this is so overly simple, and so hang with me so I can explain the nuance around this. But really what this is grief for the idea of what could have been, grief for things that haven't happened yet, and at the expense of what is currently possible in front of you. So really, again, just to say that in another word, it's really holding on to the idea of what could be, or what could have been, or what hasn't happened yet, at the expense of really focusing on, at the expense of really what's in front of you. And I think this is, in general, this is a thing that screws so many of us over in so many places in our life. I'm sure we can see how this shows up in personal relationships, how this shows up in just robbing our joy and happiness, how this shows up with our kids. I think this shows up in so many areas of life. I think this particularly shows up in business, and I'll give some more examples as to where I see that. But I think we don't talk about it very often. And we have so much noise in the online space that only speaks to the idea of what could be, that it makes it feel confusing when we're going through this grief. And so I'm going to use what I went through, what popped up for me this time last year, and I'll use that as an example to talk through this about a little bit more. But again, this is a really quiet grief, but I really do think this is so important. So last year, about this time last year, I've probably shared this before, I was starting to record modules for a course, and who knows, I might still put this out in the next couple of years. It's something that I haven't seen in the industry. I think it's actually something that fills a very specific need. I don't know if people would want to pay for it, to be quite honest, because it's not a sexy, shiny, make $1 million overnight kind of a program, but I do think it's something that is really, really needed in the coaching one-on-one service delivery space. And so again, I may or may not over the next couple of years decide to create that. But I finished and created, I don't know, probably recorded 10 videos in module 1, had that all ready. And I hit this place for me where I really realized that for me to be able to create the program that I wanted, that really felt good to deliver, and to be able to market and sell that, because I'm a one-on-one business coach. I've been doing this for 9.5 years. I've been coaching for 10 or 11, but I've been supporting clients in all sorts of models for a very long time. So I know how the sausage is made, so to say, and I really understand what goes into not just creating a great offer, right, as opposed to just slapping something together, which I think sometimes happens in our space, but actually creating a great offer that you want to deliver on, but also what goes into marketing and selling an offer, and what goes into marketing and selling a course in a way that it actually makes sense for you in terms of the profitability for that. And so I remember I literally had a session with my therapist about this, and then with my coach around this like come to Jesus moment for me, where I realized if I wanted to complete this course and I wanted to be able to market and sell it in a way that, and then actually deliver upon it in a way that facilitated the transformation and the results, and I wanted to do so without burning out. I talk a lot about sustainable scalability, and that is something that is so important to me. I want to always be walking my talk and modeling what I represent to clients. Something was going to have to give, because I have a very full one-on-one roster. I work with about 20 to 25 one-on-one clients at any given time. I usually settle around the 21 to 23 client mark. Sometimes we have a little bit of wiggle room there, just for context. But I really realized for me to be able to have the time to actually put thought and attention into this program, to record this well, to all of the things we just talked about, something was going to have to give, or it was going to burn out. And that something was either going to look like it was going to be my free time with my family. And at this stage of business, I mean, there was a season of my business where I gave up quite a bit of my free time because I was still working a 9 to 5, and this business just required a lot to get off the ground for me. I was willing to do that. At this stage in business, I'm willing to give my business a lot, but I'm not willing to cut, more into my family time at this stage, unless I really have to. For something to scale, I don't have to. It would be very different if my business were growing, for example. Or I was going to have to let go of some one-on-one clients and open up some spots. And I really had to sit with, what did I want there? Or I would have to give up something like my fitness and health, time for that. And I also wasn't willing to give that up. And so really it looked like, well, that means I would have to drop a couple of clients and either wait, until they finish, not bring on new clients, not bring on intensive, whatever that is. And I really had to sit with that. And what I ultimately came to, and I know I've shared this before, but it's important for the context of this conversation. What I ultimately came to is, while I like the idea of this course, and this might be something I want to do, what I actually love is what's in front of me, right? And it is my one-on-one clients. Like, that is what I believe in. That is not something I want to let go of right now, and I don't want to let go of any clients. Like, that's just something that feels really important for me for all sorts of reasons we don't have to talk about in this live stream. So I came to that decision. I decided to park the course. Might pick it up again in a couple of years, but I basically killed, because I was, I had created the whole outline. I had done I really fleshed this out quite far, and I just basically parked all of that. And what was really interesting is I made that decision, and I think it's definitely the right decision, and I think it's actually a decision that has helped me. Our revenue has gone up by 22% this year. So from January, I talked about this last week, for January to May this year has gone up 22% compared to January to May last year. And I do think one of the reasons is this decision, because making that decision also freed up a lot of mental bandwidth and capacity to focus on things like my marketing, to focus on things like, I talk a lot about doing less better, but literally doing less better with webinar or master classes, or with our content, or, clients are always my top priority, but even just, capacity wise, if I wanted to, I probably had a couple more intensives, the capacity for that, because I didn't have to give those up to, have a Friday off to basically create this course, for example. And side note here, because this feels so also relevant to this conversation. I was just talking about this with a client yesterday who is about to launch, and one of the things we've really been working on in her business, because she has quite a full business, is slowing down to speed up, and not like cutting her revenue dramatically, but not taking on a lot more. She has a lot of one-on-one client delivery type of business, and temporarily just being mindful of not taking on more. She has quite a bit of demand and a wait list, not taking on more there, because what is important for her is she has a different offer she's scaling into that she's launched before, is really moving into that other model as her long-term goal and vision for scalability. And for that to happen, she needed some space and time to be able to focus on, we had to update some things in the program so that the deliverability was just a little cleaner, and then really focus on the marketing, the pre-launch, and launch results don't just happen in a launch. It is what happens in pre-launch that sets you up for a launch, right? And so she needed capacity for all of that. And so we've been talking about slowing down to speed up. And so she kind of was going through the same thing I was going through that course, and that the right decision for both of us, and for both of us, and I would coach, most clients around this. I can see now, I'm a year later, I can see how doing this literally set me up to increase my revenue by 22%. I was talking about this with my client yesterday, her deciding to slow down to speed up and creating that capacity, and not just, grabbing more clients, so she could actually see this new, I'm saying this mindfully because I want to make sure I protect client confidentiality, so I don't want to give away too many details, but just so that she could really see this program I launch through in a way that's going to not just only set her up now revenue-wise, but long term. She really did need that capacity for that. Right? We both had to make that decision. I can see how for her that absolutely is going to be the thing that sets her up to scale in a much bigger way. Right? A year from now, we'll be having a similar conversation, and her revenue will have gone up by X percent, even though she had to essentially say no to something now. And for both of us, and these are conversations I've had with her, these are conversations I notice after making this decision. What's really interesting is we can know this is the right decision. I can see now, hindsight is 2020. I can see now how this, literally this decision was a big catalyst for opening up the opportunity to increase my revenue. I can see that for this client as well, in that example. And about a week or two after making this decision, I was like, wow, it's really fascinating. I didn't even finish creating this course. I haven't even sold anyone into it. I don't even know if people want to buy this, right? I'm very clear of what the hustle is that goes into launching this, and the ads and all of that. I don't even know if this would have been profitable. I know this was probably a long game play that I might step into. And I am just feeling so many feels and so much grief about the idea of what could have been, the idea of, but this could have been this great program. This could have created so much impact. This could have helped really change certain things in the industry that I think are problematic. This could have served so and supported so many coaches, and people who have one-on-one offers to, I think therapists as well, to feel so much better in their businesses. Like, I can see all of those benefits. I assume would have made me money as well, right? And so there's the perceived revenue loss as well. And I really had to sit with that. I was like, wow, this is so fascinating. I am really having to grieve something that never was. And similarly, I was having this conversation with my client. The slowing down to speed up, all this means is she hasn't intentionally taken on new clients yet, right? Where she could have to like kick her revenue up. And this will definitely set her up for a bigger launch and big results where she'll make up that revenue. But it's just been fascinating to witness how similarly does this idea of what could have been that never was, right? The client she didn't book and like what could have happened there, the client she said no to and what could have happened there. It's just fascinating how much our brain really wants to hold on to that, and how much I think we can start to create an identity and identify with that, which, look, we talk about this in coaching a lot, right? We have to think it before we are it. We kind of act as if, in air quotes, we have to sort of future trip a little bit and be able to see and embody what that would be like. And I think that's a really beneficial thing for us in terms of mindset and in terms of manifesting. And it can sometimes fuck us a little bit when we have to make these really smart strategic decisions, because sometimes we can identify so much with the future and so much with something that hasn't happened that we miss what's in front of us and what is the right best decision for us currently to be able to get all of the things we want. And those can be very two contrasting things. And when we then do make that decision, or if we do make that decision, right, that can really just kick up a lot of feels. And I think, again, the reason I think this is so important to talk about is if you make these smart strategic decisions, again, I think that was one of the smartest strategic decisions as a CEO I could have made, literally for my revenue and for my scalability. But also, I remember my therapist said to me, she's like, I think this is just such a testament to the work you've been doing in terms of nervous system regulation and just healing through certain things where I was choosing taking care of myself over burnout, essentially, and hustling harder. I have such a pattern to unwind in terms of always needing to work harder to make more, to be worthy, or all of the things there that I think a lot of us can have. I think that decision also represented that. But just if we look fiscally, like at the financial repercussions as a CEO, if I just look at this from a CEO lens, that was a very smart strategic CEO decision, and it again kicked up a lot of feels and grief. And I also think if we aren't aware of that, if we aren't aware and don't necessarily have the CEO level mindset yet to be able to understand how decisions like that can really set us up for long-term scalability. I think so often we get in business, I talk about this with clients a lot, I think it's just so easy to be so short-sighted and to miss the long game and how our immediate decisions, yes, we can get short wins, short gains, but I think we don't always understand the ripple out effect and how that affects our results 6 months, a year, even 2 years down the road. Anyway, all this is to say is because of that, if a decision like this creates or kicks up grief, or that loss of for the thing that could have been, or the identity of, I was joking, I was telling my husband, I'm like, it's sort of like that idea of don't you know who I think I am? If we don't have a way to acknowledge that and to work through that, what can often happen is we will also then stay in this decision, or stay in, if I hadn't been aware of the way this affects scaling, and if I hadn't been willing to hold myself and to move through and process that grief, what happens instead is we end up doubling down on the thing we're already doing because of I'm sure y'all have heard the sunken cost fallacy. This is the sneaky brain trap I put in the show notes that can show up for us. We can really get into a sunken cost fallacy. And I think we can also really get locked into this idea of what could be and really latch onto that at the expense, again, of what is in front of us, or what and how what is really affects the future. And it's a little nuanced, so let me know if you want me to clarify that, or if that doesn't make sense there. And with the for those of you who don't know the sunken cost fallacy essentially tells us that if we have expended time, energy, money, resources, identity to something, we will give it more weight and say it is more valuable because we have sunk costs into it, and we will often not want to stop and do something different because we think, oh, well, then I have wasted all of this time, energy, money, identity on this thing. We think of it as wasted, and so we will then continue on in something or stick with something, even if it's misaligned, even if it's not right for us, even if it's not the right strategic CEO move, even if it isn't in alignment, even if it literally will maybe give us a short win, but actually cause us to hit revenue ceilings and not to scale, for example, because of this fallacy that therefore something is more valuable, and we don't want to waste. We don't want to waste all of that energy, money, time, identity. When really what we want to understand with a fallacy like that is that time has already passed. That money is already spent. That identity, that is already done, and you don't get it back by continuing to double down, especially if this is the wrong choice and move for you. That just basically digs you deeper in the hole. But again, this is what can really cause people to get emotionally latched onto something, really cling on to something, really feel stuck in their business, and in so many ways, right? We can see this with strategies. I'm really big on picking and sticking with a strategy, but we'll use me as an example. I had my podcast. We did almost 200 episodes. I think we did 195 episodes. I loved my podcast. It converted for me. It was great for me. I did a whole episode on this, so I won't go into this too much, but a couple of years ago, I decided to pause the podcast. I got to tell you, I'm itching to bring it back, but I have to really be mindful for all the reasons we're talking about here, to see if it makes sense. And I decided at a certain point to stop the podcast in exchange for really doubling down on my live streams. And I had some grief around letting that go. I had some grief around, I love that so much. I still sometimes have grief around that podcast. The same way, just in terms of the grief piece, because I almost jumped over this, I think we can also have grief around things like ending work with an amazing client who's had great results, right? That we can still see an opportunity with, or ending an offer that was a great offer, but it was really meant for a certain season. I think we can see this, again, bringing it back to the podcast, with certain platforms or strategies or something like a podcast or a way that we deliver content. And I definitely felt that grief around that. And if I hadn't been aware of the sunken cost fallacy and this kind of brain trap, I think it would have been really easy for me to say, I've already done 195 episodes. I identify as a podcaster. I have so much identity wrapped around one question and what this represents for my brand identity and our messaging. I have spent quite a bit of money on investing in the editing. We had a copywriter at the time who was repurposing some of this into content for me. There was so much that was sunken into that could have made me feel like, well, I'm in too deep now, right? I'm going to waste all of that if I don't just keep doubling down on this. And the only way to not waste that or to make use of that is to keep doing that. Instead of seeing that time, energy, money, resources, those have already been spent. Me continuing to do this when it's no longer the right strategic decision for my business and for my goals as a business owner and a CEO, which again, if you're interested, drop me a note in the comments. I'll find the live stream. It'll be in my private podcast. It'll be on my website, but I'll find the live stream for you to talk more about that decision and why I made that decision, because it has more to do with the data and profitability and capacity and all of those things there. But that would have been really easy to keep doing what I've always done. And I think, again, this is just something that really keeps us stuck in business and really will prevent us and have us hit income ceilings. This is both the idea that, it's sort of, the grief of, I felt the grief afterwards of what could have been, right? I could have had 500 episodes. By now it probably would have been 500 episodes. It could have brought me XYZ. I don't really have capacity for more clients, but it could have set me up for more clients that way, or more revenue if we got some sponsorship, right? I had to grieve what could have been. I also really care about the body of work that I'm sharing. That's just something that's a personal, I care about it from obviously sharing with all of you and from a marketing standpoint, but it's also just something that's important to me as a creative-minded person and as someone who really cares deeply about this work, right? So I had to grieve that, but to even get to the place of grieving, right, I had to really be able to understand the sunken cost fallacy and to not fall into that, because when we're in that sunken cost fallacy, it's very easy for us to just do what we've always done, especially because we have poured so much into that, instead of really pausing to see, just because we've always done something, that doesn't mean that it is strategically the right thing for us to get where we want to go, or that it's even in alignment. And so often in business, we have to make those decisions. And when we do, if we make a decision to not do what we've always done, again, sometimes we need to pick and stick. There's absolutely a time for that. And sometimes we need to look at data, or look at our heart, or look at, strategically where our business is going, and to make those important decisions. When we do, that is often when this grief comes up. But if we don't understand this, and we don't understand the sunken cost fallacy, or we don't understand the grief and normalize it or process it, right? This is when it's really easy to keep looping and keep holding on. If I hadn't understood this, I mean, this came up for me when I left acting and went into advertising, and same when I quit my advertising job to go full-time in my business. I mean, talk about the sunken cost of time, energy, resources. I spent 10 years acting. Talk about the identity that was attached to being an actress. Same with advertising. I poured so much into breaking into that industry and time into that, and definitely had a lot of identity wrapped up in that. So if I didn't understand the sunken cost fallacy and allow myself to choose something different, right, I would have been really, and if I didn't understand the normal, like how normal it is to have some grief around letting those things go, especially when letting those things go, there has been a lot of cost associated with it, or there's a big identity shift with it. I think it's very easy then for us to keep looping and keep holding on and staying stuck in something for years, decades. I mean, I hate to use this as an example, but I think most of us know someone who has been in a relationship that it's the sunken cost fallacy, right? Like, they've been in it for so long, and they just feel like they should just do what they've always done, and there's so much identity wrapped up in it. And the grief of what could have been, right? It's not even the grief of letting something go, but really what I'm talking about here is the grief of what could have been, as opposed to opening yourself up to what actually is, right? So the grief of what this relationship could turn into. The grief for me with acting, when I let that go, the grief of like what could have been, well, if I'd stayed for another 10 years, could I have booked a TV show and been a series regular? When I left advertising, the grief of what could have been, it's like, could I have actually climbed to the top of that industry? I mean, that was a little bit easier because I didn't actually want what was at the top of that ladder. But just in terms of what I could have done and made there in that world, right? I had to not only be able to see, sometimes we can't always do what we've always done just because that's what we've always done, or just because we have so much sunken into it, and also to understand why this grief is so important. It's not just the grief of letting go, it's the grief of letting go of the future results that hasn't happened yet. And I think when we cling on to that, again, that's what can keep us doubling down on things that don't work, pouring energy into reviving things that when we're looking at the data, or when we're looking at our heart, don't make sense anymore. If we use acting, maybe that's a good example here. And let me know if this is, y'all are very quiet, so let me know if you have any questions, thoughts, reflections around this, or anything that's coming up around this. When I look at the acting example there, the grief of what could have been, if I had not acknowledged that for what that is, I could have really clung on to that, even though if I was really honest with myself, while I'll always love acting, I really stopped loving the business of acting. I really had stopped loving the process of what it meant to audition, what was available for a female of my age at that time, because this was, about 10, 11 years ago. I really had stopped loving a lot of the business side of it, and just in terms of like what it means to be an actor, as opposed to the idea of what could have been. I loved when I actually got to work, but that is one part of an acting career, or I think being an actor is very much like having a business. Similarly, I talk about this with clients all the time. Over the years, I've been doing this I've been paid coaching for 9.5. I've been coaching for 10.5, 11 years. I've definitely coached a few clients out of their businesses, because when we look at what we're talking about here, the idea of what could be is very different from what is actually true. And when they look at the process of running, we'll use coaching as an example. I think of a client last year, this conversation, she loved coaching. She hated the process of being a business owner and what it meant to have a coaching business in terms of the marketing and the selling and always having to get clients and having to deal with payments and having to have a team and having to deal with what comes up for clients in the container, all of those pieces. And really, we've found she liked the work, and I coached her to essentially get a job coaching at a company that basically takes care of the business side of things. And part of what we had to work through is the sunken cost fallacy, and also this idea of, and work through the grief of the idea of what could have been but wasn't true, so that she could actually harness what was true and what was in front of her. So similarly to me, with acting, with all of these things here. And had we not done that, right, she could have just kept going down the road of, but I'm supposed to like this even though I don't. And like the idea of what could happen if she just gave it another 3 years, as opposed to but that was an idea of something, not something she actually wanted, that was even in alignment. And because she was willing to make that decision, and because she was willing to process and grieve the idea of what could have been, she was able to get the thing she actually really wanted. And so kind of using myself as an example, right? Being willing to make some of these decisions and grieve the idea of what could have been but never was, so that I can have what actually is here and build that. Right? That's what's allowed me to do things like continue to stay fully booked, or that's what's allowed me to double down on certain things that were working in my business really well, to have my business scale our revenue by 22%. We use the client I gave as an example, who's about to launch. Her grieving the idea of what could have been with some of these imaginary clients she never even worked with, right? So that she could instead focus and move and grieve through that, so she could focus on what currently is. That's setting herself up to not just have a great launch now, but really the long term of her business for what actually is. But she had to not give into the sunken cost fallacy, and she also had to be able to make that strategic CEO decision and let herself grieve that idea, that identity, again, so that she could step into what is true for her and to maximize that to scale. I'm really hoping this concept makes sense, because again, I think when we don't acknowledge this and process this, it's not just like keeps us holding on to things. I think we can pour energy into the wrong things. I think we can kind of like double down and stay stuck in business. I think it can block our clarity and our forward momentum, but I think it can also create a lot of shame, self-blame, and that can really have us loop. One of the ways I see that show up quite a bit for clients is this idea that when they finish with a long-term client that they love, that they shouldn't grieve that, and that it should just feel okay and normal. And again, I think, of course, no matter, this isn't even just grieving the idea of what could have been. Oftentimes this is grieving, even though it's a beautiful bittersweet, right? I can think about clients I've closed out with who, one messaged me not too long ago to tell me about some of her results, and like, we had such a great experience. It was just, she was complete with the work, and I think she's now on track for 6 figures, and like, all beautiful, wonderful things, right? That is what the coaching container is designed to do. And it's normal for some people. I've had clients, I have many clients in my roster who've been with me 4 or 5, I think up to 6 years now, and a couple who renew a year at a time. That is also normal, but it is also normal for some people to be complete in a one-on-one model. I reflect this to other clients with the one-on-one model all the time. Excuse me, there's like dust. My nose is very, very itchy there. Does that mean something? Palms itching means money. What does nose itching mean? Okay, maybe it just means allergies. But this is all very normal. And if you're someone who cares about your clients and you've built a relationship with someone over 6 months or over 5 years, of course, there's going to be an element of sadness, grief, right, that we need to process around this. But I think the other piece to this, I see this quite a bit for my clients who have work with clients one-on-one. A lot of times there's also a grief to what could have been, in terms of, this client feels complete, but I can still see the potential for where they could go. I could see how much more opportunity there is to do more work together. I think that's often the case. I can think of a couple of clients where we've had this conversation where there is a little bit of grief because they can really see the potential for what could be for this person, and the client decided for whatever reason not to continue on for another round, or they've decided not to continue with their business. And I think it's just so important to normalize. That is such a normal feeling. But if we don't normalize that, and if we don't normalize, of course, not only are you going to have grief for the relationship, but you can also have grief for what hasn't even happened yet. and we don't process that so that we can let it go to focus on what is true, right? Like that's the catapult for how we get to grow. We will stay stuck in that. We will loop around that. Like that's the place where I see a lot of people create shame and self-blame, where it's like, well, but I should have been able to get them this result, or I should have been able to get them to stay, or a lot of things that don't even make sense in a healthy coaching container. Versus, again, being able to process so you can get to acceptance, right? That's part of the grief process, which allows you to get to neutrality, which, if you know my work, I think neutrality is the power place to operate as a CEO from. Not positivity, not negativity. Those can both be a little bit not dysregulated, but they don't always help us to see very clearly. Neutrality is the key. And for us to get to neutral with things like this, right, we first have to acknowledge that these are normal things that come up for everyone, but we have to allow ourselves to go through the grief process so that we can end in that acceptance, which kind of opens that up. Otherwise, again, we will just, I mean, I'm sure all of you have either experienced this or have seen this with clients of yours or know peers who go through this. Otherwise, like if we're using the client example, it is just so easy to get fixated on something and to not let it go, and how much that will become a thorn in a lens in which you operate your business from. If you get fixated on the loss of something that hasn't even happened yet, whether that's with a client who didn't continue and the results they didn't get yet because they didn't stay long enough or whatever that is, or the course you didn't create, or the client you didn't take on so that you could launch your course, right? If you get so fixated on that, that becomes your focal point in your business, and what we focus on expands. And so that becomes the place where we start doubling down on things that don't make sense, or we really just leap in a mindset-wise in a way that keeps us very stagnant, as opposed to, again, being able to process through that, get to acceptance, get to neutral, so that we can be the CEOs who are making those smart strategic decisions, but also doubling down on the things that are moving us forward to what actually is in front of us and what actually will be. Okay, I've got one more note on here for y'all, and then I will wrap this up. I think it's a pretty easy concept, but also maybe nuanced. So again, questions, thoughts, reflections here, or if you're listening in the vault in the replay, you can always hit reply one of the emails and let me know if you have a question around this. But what I would say with this, and why I wanted to bring this conversation here, is I think sometimes it's just so helpful to have these things normalized so we can name. I talk a lot naming and taming something. It's sort of like fear. What is it, the Carl Jung quote, which is, until we make the fear until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our life and we will call it fate. I might be butchering that a little bit, but I'm sure you all have heard this before. You've probably heard me talk about the fear inventory, which is a process. It is an exercise by Carolyn Elliott. If you don't know what I'm talking about and you want to know what I'm talking about, comment below this if this video is still up in the group, or shoot me an email or send me a DM. I actually have that exercise written out. I share with clients. I'm happy to share with you. Anyway, bringing it back here, there is so much power in having awareness around what we're feeling and naming it and taming it so that we can actually process and release it. So often I think we have this idea that we have to like fix uncomfortable feelings, and I think that's where we can either avoid them or stay really stuck in them with something like grief. I mean, grief is not an emotion to fix, and it is not an emotion to solve, just like fear is not an emotion to fix or an emotion to solve. But again, to kind of what we were speaking to earlier, when we have uncomfortable feelings, we are just so quick to either think I need to fix, solve this, or it feels so uncomfortable, we want to push it away, we want to avoid it, or we think I'm wrong that I have this, and we get into self-blame and shame, and all of these things that just keep us really stuck, as opposed to remembering so many emotions are, David Hawkins talks about this in Letting Go, which is a great book, by the way. So many emotions, if we actually allow ourselves to name them, to feel and process them through and out, can actually be quite short-lived in our body. And if we allow ourselves to do this without trying to intellectualize or fix something, right, it is often easier to process something through and to get through the grief process and to be able to get to acceptance so that we can get to neutral, so that we can show up as CEOs in our business. And so I would just really invite you to play with this, as this is such an old part of business. And if you're noticing this come up, allow yourself to name this, allow yourself to process it, and know that by naming this and just sitting, even with naming and sitting with an emotion and not trying to fix it, solve it, rearrange it, again, not trying to wrestle it. I've heard, what is it? Not DBT therapy.
It's a different form of therapy. I cannot think of, it's a mindfulness based form of therapy, and it's also got letters. It's evading my brain right now. I need more caffeine apparently. But in what is it? I wish I could think of it. Anyway, it's a mindfulness based approach to therapy, and a lot of what they talk about is how when we try to wrestle with our thoughts, it's like trying to wrestle a bear, or it's trying to when we wrestle with thoughts, we're just going to sink more into the quicksand. Whereas opposed to if we cannot wrestle with our thoughts and with our feelings, if we can instead name them, acknowledge them, just sit with them, they will process through and out. We don't have to fix your feelings. Like they're not something to be fixed. And so if you can again start to acknowledge this and normalize this, I think so often because we don't even know what it is, it's hard to even name, or because we don't know this is normal, right? We just feel something that feels uncomfortable and we will displace it and think it's because of something else, or we'll create a story where it's like, oh, it's actually because my business is failing, or I'm doing something wrong, or insert story there, as opposed to being able to recognize this for what it is, being able to name your emotion, sit with it, and just allow it to process through and out. That will really open up so much emotional capacity. But more than anything, it's going to allow you to have acceptance and move to neutrality. If this is helpful to hear, it's not like I have solved my grief around letting go of acting and starting my business. I think that was the absolute best decision for me, and I am so grateful, and I love my business, and I love my clients, and I love my life, and I don't think I'd have any of this had I not made that decision. And I still sometimes have grief around that. I still sometimes have, miss that. And if I can allow, and I still sometimes, every year when the Oscars come on, I have a moment where I grieve the idea of what could have been, even in expense of what is, and I just have to let myself normalize that, not try to fix the emotion, just feel it, and then a day later it's gone. But if I didn't do that, I could spin myself out, right? I would pull myself into the quicksand of that emotion. I could make myself so wrong, spin myself so out, and like quit my business a week later and think that I'm doing the wrong thing, or sabotage my business, or think I'm horrible in all of these ways, or such a failure in all the different things that could come up, as opposed to, oh, well, now that I know what that is, I can name it, I can sit with it, I can process, I can have my feels and process it through and out. I can get to a little bit of acceptance. When I'm in acceptance, I can get to neutral. Then I can also neutrally make strategic decisions, show up as a CEO. And once I'm at neutral, what I actually realized was, oh, this is what I'm actually meant to be doing, or what I want to focus my life on, then I can make a decision from there. And I would know it's coming from a really neutral place, and a place that is thinking clearly based on really what's in alignment and what's best for me, versus a very reactive place, or from the sunken cost fallacy. Is there anything else I wanted to say around this? I think I just want to close here because, again, I've just seen this come up. We'll just use the course that I had to grieve last year, grieve the idea of what could have been. And there's grief all the time in our business, but really what I want to land the plane on, the term I was saying I was using last week so much, is this idea that it is just really normal to grieve something that you've never even had. And I think that can sound so backwards, but I really think it's just such a real thing. And I do think it's important to grieve those things, and to also understand, kind of where that's coming from, and to not make yourself wrong in that. But it's so important, just to kind of put a bow on this conversation, because if we don't, again, we will loop around that, and we will forever stay stuck, or future trip to things, make ourselves wrong, or future trip to things that aren't, or go down a path. Like if I hadn't allowed myself to go make that decision and to grieve that, I don't know, I might have gone down a different path last year. I very likely could have burnt out. And I honestly don't think I would have scaled my revenue the same way. I think what happens as well when we are grieving the idea of what could have been, the future that could have been, but that didn't, right? I think we do this in relationships sometimes when people decide to end a relationship, or to turn down a Shark Tank. This happens a lot when people decide to turn down a deal, or they accept a deal and then they grieve like what could have been. What this opens you up to when you allow yourself to acknowledge this and grieve this is, again, the aligned strategy and what is. And that also allows you to build momentum, and it also allows you to grow from a place of alignment instead of chasing improving. I think a lot of times when we are choosing things based on the idea of what could be, And again, this is so gray and nuanced because of course we all have to have big goals and like we're running after that, but we're talking about things where you've made this strategic decision or alignment decision that something doesn't make sense. So you're choosing to say no to something and grieve the idea of what could have been so that you can embrace what is and to build that. A lot of times what we're also grieving again is that identity, that whole idea of like, don't you know who I think I am, an identity that isn't actually true. And a lot of times that is our ego. If I'm really, really, really honest with myself, if I go back to that course idea, again, if I do decide to create this course in the next couple of years, I don't know that I will, but let's just say I do, one of the things I'm really clear on is I will only do that if it comes from a non-ego place and a place because it's really what I want to be doing, what I want to focus on, what's in alignment, what I think is the best delivery and offer. If I'm really honest with myself, when I go back to when I originally came up with that idea, love the idea, like love all the things for it. Like I think there's a lot of great intention there, but part of the reason I was taking action on it in that place was a little bit driven from ego and a little bit of that ego driven place in terms of like who I thought I could be, because I am like all of you and I'm in an online space. I have chosen to have an all one-on-one model for 9.5 years now. Been fully booked for 6.5, and so I started coach training, I think it's been 11 years now. And even the coach training I was in basically told me the way to grow a coaching business was to scale out of one-on-one as quickly as possible and to go into groups and masterminds, right? To have other models. I have had it drilled in my brain for 11 years then that having an all one-on-one model is like failing and it's wrong. And it's like, it's what you do if you're starting out, not what you do if you're scaling and successful or if you're a good coach. And I've had to work against that. And I clearly have, and I'm happy, like I feel so solid in this. And right, there's a little bit of that programming, or I look around at my peers where I'm like, oh, but like I to be a successful coach, to let people know I'm successful, to let people know I'm good at what I'm doing, like I should have a bigger offer suite. I should have more top line revenue because no one cares about the profit margin in marketing, whatever, all the noise that gets up there. So if I'm honest with myself, there was a small part of what was driving creating that course that was very much coming from that ego place. And so that grief as well, like I think we have to remember when we let go of the idea of what could have been and that identity as well in exchange for what is and really doubling down there, a lot of times that is also letting go of, I mean, it can be a little bit of an ego death, but what's so positive is if we can process that, a lot of times that takes us out of the chasing, proving energy and space and doing things we think we're supposed to so that we can get arbitrary validation from people outside of us. I find so often when we think of like the idea of what could have been, that is a part of it. And so that can be, I talk a lot about how, I'm sure there's a lot of content people in business, but I really think I'm one of the most content people I know who are running a business. And I feel I love my business. I love my clients. I make great money. Like I'm super happy. I love my relationship. I have a lot of spaciousness, right? It's kind of everything I've ever wanted. But I think part of the reason for that is I've been able to make it okay to grieve some of these things and to choose things that don't have me chase or prove or do what I think I'm supposed to do to get validation from other people. And it is not always easy, right? I've had to do the work around that or get support around that or to grieve things like we're talking about here, to grieve the idea of what could have been, right? I have to grieve the idea of this big business and what that would look like so that I can have the business I do have that I really, really love. But because of that, I've again, I've had to do this work over and over again. It has really allowed me to create, sounds so cheesy, success on your terms. I talk about that a lot, but really success on my terms. And I wrote a post about this earlier this week. I do think that also makes things so much sweeter for you. And when you do that, the irony is you actually create space and capacity for bigger results, for more sustainability. I actually think by doing that, that is what set me up to scale and to make more money anyway. All right. I love y'all. I hope this was valuable for you. I know that this was a little bit of a nuanced conversation, so let me know in the comments, or you can send me a DM. I love to know, just in terms of what I'm delivering and sharing for you, are these kinds of conversations helpful for you? Does this land? Is this helpful to hear and to have normalized? Because I know this is a little bit like more on the like deep thinky side of things. If this is helpful, yeah, I would just like to know so I know what kind of stuff to bring to you. Or do you like more of a little less nuanced content? I always want to know so that I can tailor this for you, though. I mean, I like to go into the nuance, so we'll probably still always have some of those. Then if you have any questions or follow-ups that you want me to do a live stream or anything like that on, you can also let me know. And then I will be back next week with another topic for you. Oh, I should say I am fully booked with clients, but we are opening up some consultations for week-long strategy intensives. So if you have been curious about what it would look like to work with me, if you're wanting support with mapping out a marketing strategy, getting clear on what we're talking about here, getting clear on the right offer for your business, what's actually in alignment, what's actually going to set you up to scale, making some of those strategic decisions, mapping out a sales process, or looking at making a launch strategy for the first time, or updating and refining a launch strategy or sales process so that you can set yourself up for not just short-term results, but those long-term results. I'm really big on setting you up for the sustainable long-term results and that reoccurring revenue, whether that's reoccurring 10K months or 100K months or anywhere in between. A strategy intensive is great for that. They are week long, and it's a great way to get to see what it's like to work together. Don't mind my cat as she's joining us here. So I will drop a link for a free coaching consultation. And then, hot tip, usually when I have a one-on-one spot up, we will give an invitation first to someone I've had an intensive with and already connected with. So if you're also curious about ongoing coaching spots, I might have some opening up later this summer, early fall. This is a great way to get first availability, but also for us to see what it's like to work together. So I'll drop a link for a free coaching consultation, and then I'll be back next week to chat more with y'all. All right, love you all so much.